Okay, so I think officially my slot starts in 5 minutes, but I thought I'd just use the extra time to basically start with the introduction, and then hopefully some more people might join on the way. So first of all, this presentation will be about AI coaching, which is a field I've been in for the last 7 years. As a matter of fact, we are one of the pioneers in AI coaching. So we started working on this 10 years ago, roughly, as researchers at the Technical University of Munich, kind of, in a sense, creating this market and this initial idea that AI could be used to coach sales reps, leaders, people all across the spectrum. And over the time, we've basically done a lot of experimentation. 7 years ago, obviously, the AI wasn't quite where it is now, right? So there was a lot of learnings on the way, and luckily, we kind of caught the right wave and, in a sense, became mainstream and are now kind of continuously riding this wave. And at this point, we have roughly 20 large enterprise clients. We initially actually started not in pharma, but in the automotive industry, moved into the insurance industry. And for the last 2 years, the AI has reached a level of sophistication where we can use it to train sales reps in pharma organizations. And our hypothesis already in 2018, when we founded the company, was that AI will come and it will play a bigger and bigger role in the work of sales reps. And at the time, we assumed that with AI coming into that sphere, sales reps will have to evolve from transactional work, which is the kind of work that they currently still do to a large extent, into experiential work, right? So instead of enabling transactions and answering questions or discussing prices, it will be very much about offering great customer experiences, right? Because just explaining documents, answering questions, and so on, that's something that the AI will be able to do just as well, right? And the problem we see is that most sales reps are not quite there yet, right? So if we look into pharma, we see that basically 67% of HCPs perceive interactions with the field force as not very helpful. And actually, roughly 35% of HCPs either completely stopped accepting visits from HCPs or are reducing them right now, right? So we have this challenge that AI is taking over the transactional jobs of the sales reps, but at the same time, they haven't moved fast enough to actually offer a great experiential experience. And what we see pharma companies do to fix this problem is they just send out more PDFs to their field force, sometimes dozens of PDFs every quarter with updates and new product information and segmentations, right? And they somehow hope that just sending out this documentation into the markets will basically fix that problem and basically enable the sales reps to offer greater experiences. And in reality, that doesn't really work, right? Because what it's ultimately about is about driving stronger human connections, right? Of course, you also want to keep the sales reps up to date, and you want to make sure they're aware of all the relevant clinical evidence. But it's not enough to just send them regular updates, right? It's really about basically changing their mindset, and the way how this is currently done usually doesn't work very well. And so when we founded Retorio 2018 already, the idea was to, instead of using AI agents to do sales jobs, we wanted to build AI agents to actually help the sales reps become better sellers, right? So in a sense, counterintuitive to most other AI startups in our time that basically try to replace the sales force out there. Our approach was always to use AI to enable them to make a better or do a better job. And based on that, the underlying assumption was to say, of course, AI agents will take over more and more transactional tasks, right? They will also become better at that. But the problem is, all of you guys, you will start introducing more and more AI agents, right? And there will be an oversaturation in the market, right? So more and more companies are introducing, for instance, AI agents to do cold calling, right? To try to get more appointments. More and more of you guys are probably using AI already to start sending emails out, to personalize them. And this currently leads to this enormous oversaturation where the average HCP already 5 years ago received, I think, 7 emails per day from the pharma industry. This now moved towards 10 to 15 emails for some specialized, for instance, oncologists. And now the agents start calling those doctors as well, right? So just imagine what's going to happen if the average HCP gets 100 calls from AI agents from the pharma industry on a daily basis. You know, at some point they will obviously not pick up the phone anymore, right? And in a sense, we call that self-destruction through saturation. To some extent, the AI agents that were supposed to replace human sales reps quite often end up replacing themselves because they so oversaturate a sales channel that basically the whole sales channel is dead for everyone, right? So for us, it was always clear that the sales reps, the field force will stay relevant because they have the connection, they have the access to the doctors, but they need to improve, right? And that's where AI sales coaching basically comes into play, right? So you can imagine it a little bit like a flight simulator for your sales team. So we prepare sales reps through role plays to prepare for what we call one-shot moments, right? So if you have a meeting with a key opinion leader or like a specialized whatever oncologist, you might not have that many shots, right? And it's important that you're as well prepared as possible. And through this kind of digital flight simulator, we prepare the sales reps to better go into these meetings, right? To have the right messaging in place. On average, we see that sales reps going through that experience can react up to 10 times faster to market changes. They tend to practice up to 20 times more before they talk to an actual HCP, and at the same time, we can increase the speed of onboarding, may it be new sales reps, but also on new products by up to 70%. So just to make it a little bit more clear, what exactly is actually behind AI sales coaching, right? So ultimately, it's actually 4 different kinds of AI that come together in one platform, at least in our case, and I guess we're one of the more sophisticated players in the market, having been around for 7 years. So there are algorithms that help in content generation. They basically translate your documentation into meaningful coaching programs, right? So there's a lot of generative AI that basically builds content for you a lot faster at very little cost. Then you have generative AI to simulate real-life conversations with typical HCP personas, right? So there's generative AI that basically generates avatars that represent your real doctors and clients. Then you have the actual AI coaching, which is a set of algorithms that analyze video and voice data of the sales reps interacting within the role play, right? So there's a bunch of models, visual and audio-based, also contextual, that analyze the behavior of the sales reps in those role plays. And then in the background, there's a whole suite of algorithms that do analytics, right? And help you figure out how effective your coaching program is, what impact it has, where the skills, the strengths, the weaknesses of your team are, and so on. And with our pharma clients, we use the technology basically across all stages of a product life cycle. Quite often, we're involved already in the launch stage, where it's about quickly ramping up a field force, sometimes also an external field force, on a new product, right? We use it throughout the maturity process. Quite often, actually, our kind of main business right now in pharma is protecting a product that's already on the market against new competition, and basically making sure that the sales reps out there in the field, quite often at a global scale, have the right arguments to react to a new competitor. And then it sometimes moves across maturity. So I wanted to do a showcase today, and unfortunately some of our existing clients are very sensitive when it comes to presenting very concrete examples from their own projects, given that on these kinds of events, their competitors had to sit in the room. And quite often it's about reframing the messaging, for instance, in an oncology blockbuster to react to new competition. So I'm going to use a generic example, in this case Novo Nordisk, to be able to go a little bit more into detail and show you how such a use case can actually work in practice. And for the following, just imagine we would be working with Novo Nordisk. They might mandate us, for instance, to retrain their sales force to prepare for a new competitor, Zepbound, that's going into the market, right? And I just want to show you how such a project typically would happen in our platform, right? And the first challenge in such a project that we would have is that we would have to brief our AI coach to basically start understanding the market, start understanding the product, the challenge, right? And for that, you need to basically brief the AI coach. And we do that through our own platform. So our clients, they have access to this admin view where they basically go in the platform and they tell the AI coach what strategic goal they actually want to accomplish in rolling out the coaching program, right? So in this case, you might want to set up goals like, hey, I want my sales reps to start asking the right questions. I want them to qualify the needs of HCPs. But also maybe there's some new messaging you want to place and you want to make sure that the sales reps have the right arguments to handle certain objections, right? So basically in text form, you just write your training goals into the AI, right? The AI will understand those goals. Then in the next step, the AI has the problem that it obviously doesn't know anything about your product and your competitor, right? So what we did in this case, and it just took us 5 minutes, we went on the Wegovy website, we downloaded all the publicly available information. We did the same for Zepbound. We downloaded basically PDFs based on the websites. We uploaded them into our AI. And the AI read through all these documents. It basically summarized what it learned from these documents. And it automatically suggests learning goals and it proposes messages and arguments to position Wegovy against Zepbound based on this documentation, right? And of course, you can go in there and you can adjust certain things. You can fine-tune it. You can basically combine it with the messaging maybe that you developed in your marketing team. And in order to make sure that there's no problems with the medical legal reviews, we always reference the initial base source, the base truth on which the AI is learning in the coaching program, so that later on, when a sales rep receives feedback, there's a clear reference showing exactly where a certain recommendation comes from, and we can make sure that there's no hallucination by making sure that the recommendation from the AI is always linked to an exact set of data or facts that can be kind of validated. Then in the next step, you want to create virtual representations of the HCPs that your sales reps actually are selling to, right? And for that, we have what we call our persona generator. So our clients, they basically either upload their existing client segmentation into our software, or they can just configure it within the software. So for instance, they, in this case, might create a persona of an endocrinologist who has certain values, a certain personality, right? You can freely adjust these people and basically build them after your real clients. You can also feed in data that you have in your CRM system, right? Give them pains, goals, typical objections. And in this case, you could just write some prompts in there, but you could also upload hundreds of pages of documentation you have about your HCPs. And that's totally up to you, right? And over time, you create this library of the most typical HCPs that your people out there have to deal with, right? And then the actual simulation starts, right? So you start inviting your sales reps to start practicing and improving, in this case, their differentiation of Wegovy against Zepbound, right? So you can invite them through your CRM system, or you directly invite them by email, right? Typically, we integrate our role plays, the coaching sessions, into the everyday experience of the sales reps, so that, for instance, they do these role plays in preparing for a concrete client call, right? And then the actual conversation with the simulated HCP starts. And it's very much following the user experience of a video call, where basically the HCP books himself into your calendar, right? At some point, a link opens, and then you face the simulated HCP in front of you. In this case, he's completely talking freely, so there's two modes of simulation that we have. One is kind of a more pre-scripted setup. The other one is a completely free-floating conversation. And in this case, my job now is based on the training configuration that we've built, right, to start basically accomplishing the instructions that whoever set up the training program made for me, right? And in this case, for instance, my job is to start asking the right questions. You know, in this case, inquire about the experience of the HCP with Wegovy, right? Figure out why the HCP might favor Zepbound, right? So there's an open conversation that moves in stages. So the first stage is usually asking the right questions, qualifying the needs, right? The second stage is quite often to then position certain key arguments, you know, talk about certain study results. In this case, for instance, my job is to highlight that there is certain clinical evidence that's more in favor of Wegovy and not so much in favor of Zepbound, right? And while I'm interacting with the simulated HCP, I'm already getting some first feedback in terms of whether I'm moving the conversation in the right direction. If I'm moving it in the wrong direction, the AI at some point will just stop the conversation and tell me, hey, you lost the HCP. He doesn't want to continue this conversation anymore, and I would have to start all over again. If I achieve the goals of a stage of the conversation, it will let me to the next stage, right? And so step by step, I make it to the last part of the conversation, where it's usually about agreeing on a follow-up action. You know, having a clear call to action, agreeing on a follow-up talk or on a next step, just making sure that the sales reps get out of the conversation with a clear next step. And after finishing the conversation, the AI then gives me an overview about overall my conversation. You know, what worked well, what things do I have to work on, right? So in this case, for instance, I get some positive feedback because I inquired about the right things, right? But the AI usually has some recommendations for me. And in this case, for instance, I should have mentioned Wegovy's extensive long-term data in obesity treatment, right? So there's a certain kind of talking point that I didn't make, and the AI will basically look into the base documentation that it got this talking point from and tell me exactly what I could have said to make a better impression, right? And then at the end of it, I get this kind of summary, right, where the AI then gives me very concrete recommendations in terms of what arguments I could have done to leave a better impression. And it's all designed in a way that there's a reference, right, so there's no risk of hallucination. Then if I want to focus more on soft skills and make sure that my sales reps don't only have the right arguments, but that they basically also find the right way of interacting with the HCPs, we also do video analysis, right, where we look into the behavior of the sales rep and we figure out, you know, what kind of communication style do they use, you know, how friendly do they come across, do they make enough breaks, do they excite the HCP, right, do they use too technical terms, do they keep it too simple, right? So there's a bunch of soft skills we can always analyze in the background. We don't always show these analysis, right, because people don't improve on those skills as quickly as they do on their knowledge, but from time to time we give the sales reps a feeling how they're evolving and to which extent they're improving. So what you've seen before is the current version of the product. The next version of the product that we're launching right now is already a little bit more advanced in terms of the user experience. So the avatars are getting more and more photorealistic. They answer a lot faster. And to be honest, we're not far away from a point where it's almost hard to recognize that you're not talking to a human, but that you're talking to an AI. So generally, there's a lot of speed right now in development in terms of the user experience and basically creating HCP simulations that feel more and more realistic. One last thing I want to show you. So just imagine now you roll out this global coaching program, right? You might localize some of the content which the AI can help you with, push it on the markets. Then as a person in a global role, you might want to know, is this training program actually working, right? What impact is it having? And so through the interactions of hundreds, sometimes thousands of sales reps with the system, there's a lot of data we can generate and feed back to the headquarters, right? So we can help you figure out where your sales force stands, right? What is their skill level? What kind of messages are they actually able to deliver, right? How do they currently pitch the product? You know, how do they react to different HCP personas? Do they have the right strategies to do that? And quite often, it's not so much about just figuring out if they follow what you recommend them to do, but also to learn if there's kind of hidden best practices that other people in the organization can learn from, right? So any word the sales reps say is being stored and can be analyzed on an anonymized level by our LLM systems, and they can basically start looking for patterns that you might not be aware of, right? But you can also use this data to measure the effectiveness of your training program, right? Measure to which extent it delivers return on investment, right? How effectively is it improving, for instance, the communication, messaging, whatever you wanna accomplish, right? So to wrap it up, what we typically observe is that we can roll out coaching programs up to 10 times faster, right? You can sit there in your headquarters, upload your existing documentation, have the AI help you localize the content and push it out in the markets. And in reality, it typically still takes a few weeks because there's MLR processes and so on. But from a technical point of view, you can set it up in minutes, and you could, in theory, invite your sales reps around the world within minutes to, for instance, react to a new study or a new kind of evidence or whatever you wanna have them react to, right? And not just make sure that they have the knowledge, but also make sure that they can explain it to different HCP personas in the most effective way, right? And you can make sure that it works because you get data back telling you how well they're actually able to apply it. What we also observe is that the sales reps are actually accepting the system quite well. So we have 80% voluntary activation rates when we introduce the technology on a voluntary base. When we do it obligatory, of course, then you have roughly 100% activation, because if you force people to do it, they will do it. But most of the time we don't have to do that, because the sales reps, they're seeking for guidance, for advice, right? They flooded with PDFs that they can't process, right? So typically, within a week after reading a PDF, they will have forgotten 90% of the content, and even of the 10% they can remember, they will on average only be able to apply roughly 20%. We see that with AI coaching, you can move up to 70%, 80% knowledge retainment, and you can make sure that of those 70%, 80% are being applied and practiced, right? And that's something that the data shows continuously. And depending on the use case, that can lead to a strong business case, right? So quite often we see that when we, for instance, use the product to defend a market against a new competitor, we see up to 7% more kind of sustained market share across the sales reps that are using the technology on average versus those that are not using it. I haven't talked too much about clients, and there's a bunch of references we can give. Teva is one of our biggest clients in pharma. But we also work, for instance, with Amgen and I think 3-4 other pharma companies. Plus, we have roughly 20 clients outside of the pharma industry. So we're also quite big in the insurance industry. So there's quite a bit of overlap, and we're launching the platform in parallel in different markets. So if this was interesting to you, feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to book a demo, experience it yourself, and I'm happy to take your questions if there are any.
Language on some other languages as well?
No, so we are currently supporting 7 languages, and we're now moving to 20 languages within the next few weeks because we're in a global rollout with a big pharma client. So basically, I think we can cover 70% of the world population in terms of language at this point. Yeah.
Okay. Do you know which languages will be in this 20?
Yeah, a lot of them. So mostly, so we're very strong in the European languages, right? So currently it can be used in the main Western European markets, right? We're now moving more into kind of niche European languages, well, niche is the wrong term, but for instance, Greek and a lot of Eastern European languages are being added right now. Also Hebrew, then we're adding Arab right now, and the Asian languages, so Japanese, Korean are still in development right now.
So I guess this is very sales focused at the moment, and is the future or the near future medical field reps? And if you haven't done that yet, what are some of the obstacles there versus the sales force?
So we also use it on the MSL teams, and the challenge there quite often is that in that area you don't want to have those super clear instructions. It's not so much about usually training them on concrete messaging, because usually they experts in the field and they tend to know what they're talking about. So it's more about training them a methodology of having better conversations, and that's something we can also cover. So we are currently trying that out with one of our biggest clients, but it's kind of a first attempt, so we don't have any feedback yet. We're just in the middle of launching that. But we see that there's a lot of interest. We also actually have some use cases in market access where we train market access managers. But of course, in sales, we have 7 years of experience, and it's kind of our bread and butter business, and we know what we're doing. So there's always a stronger case there. But the technology is agnostic. We also use it for leadership trainings, for instance, performance management reviews, motivational trainings, and so on.
Thanks for the presentation. Based on your experience, how often should the reps be kind of re-coaching themselves? Is it at a sort of every cycle, or how does that work?
Yeah. So, I mean, in an ideal world, the more they do it, the more they improve. We see that when they repeat a certain training module with a HCP persona, you have a very strong learning curve the first 3 iterations they do. So they improve 20 to 30% the first 3 times they practice something. Then the curve tends to flatten, right? So there's not that much added value of doing something 5 or 10 times. So then it comes very much down to having more content and making sure that there's always new content you can train them with, right? And that's very much up to our clients, to which extent they willing to put in more content in the system, like additional HCP personas, new messages, and so on. The average user uses it like very heavily in the first few weeks, and then it goes down to a few usages per month. But then typically there's new initiatives or new products being launched or new calls where they need to prepare for. So the average user uses it roughly then every 2 weeks at some point, and that's a good level of repetitiveness to keep up their knowledge and keep them engaged. Where we're moving is to integrate it more and more into super concrete call preparation, to say, hey, you have a meeting with the following HCP type in 20 minutes. You may be sitting in the car because you have 20 minutes left. Why don't you use that time on your iPad to prepare for that specific conversation you're going to have? And we're moving more and more in a direction where the HCP personas in the system are not just 3-4 different personas that are suggested by the global marketing team, but where they based on data that is, for instance, in the CRM system, right? And that basically feeds into super concrete simulations of the actual doctor you're going to face in a few minutes. Thank you.